So, the minimum digital living standard. This is a big project. So as you will see here, there's quite a big team that's been involved with the project. The group from University of Liverpool, group from University of Loughborough, the Good Things Foundation, and colleagues from a number of other academic and research organisations, as well as, at the moment, from the work that's completed, Compass in Wales, which is the kind of oversight group for charities in Wales. And we've been fortunate to have been funded for the main project by the Nuffield Foundation, who fund social and welfare research. Nominet, who, if you don't know who they are, they kind of own .uk, that little bit at the end of your email address that says .uk, and they're a not-for-profit, and they do a lot of work with young people, and they supported our young people work, and the Welsh Government. Since then, and I guess we need to update this slide, the Scottish Government is also now funding us to look at the issues of the kind of MDLS in Scotland as well. So that's the team behind the project. Why are we doing this? Well, as many of you on the call will know, there's quite a lot of ways we can think about measuring what is digital exclusion or digital inclusion, digital inequalities between one group or another. And a lot of them are quite basic. They're things like, do you or don't you own a piece of technology? Do you or don't you have broadband? You know, what level of access have you got? And then something around maybe about skills or levels of use, or maybe types of use. And then more kind of broadly benefits and hazards. And one of the issues is that lots of different organizations measure one or more of these things in separation and often at an individual level. And a long time ago, it feels now, Emma and I had a conversation, and Emma had the really good idea of talking to the minimum income standards group at Loughborough, who have a methodology for getting the public to agree what is an acceptable minimum of goods and services a household needs or a person needs, so they can calculate a household income that's needed to meet that. Now, the minimum income standard is higher than the minimum wage or the living wage, but it is still essentially the level that households themselves believe if you fall below it, you start to fall into aspects of poverty. Could we take that that work and look at households, because households matter for digital? You know, you don't always have everybody has a laptop, the shared devices in the home, people rely on each other for support. The costs of digital are often a household cost, not an individual cost. We know that there are lots of households where all members or multiple members of the household may be more limited digital users. And obviously, when it comes to households with children, things like access to education are important, but also for other household types, access to healthcare or local or national government services are important at a household level. So we thought, can we rethink looking at digital inclusion and exclusion at a household level and get the public to tell us what the requirements are, not government saying what's essential digital skills, or us as academics or charities or local government saying these are the minimum that we think people need. So we used the methodology that Loughborough use, and they did the field work for us. And that consists of 4 rounds of in-depth, deliberative discussion groups, focus groups with people from lots of different household types, not just the ones that have got lots of kit, not just the ones that are excluded, but a mix. And initially, we looked at households with children, essentially because that's what we got money to do. We didn't get enough money to do all household types at that point. So we had to pick one, and households with children seemed both one of the larger groups and an important group. The first stage, though, that stage 1, it says there, was all household types, and all household types were brought together. So older people, younger people, people living together, people living on their own, people with kids, people without kids, etc. Working age, post-working age, and so on. And they all work through several rounds of focus groups to come up with a kind of verbal definition of what it means to be sort of digitally included, to have the minimum you need so that below which you start to suffer digital exclusion. It's gone through various tweaks, and now we're moving on, as Emma will tell you later, to look at other household types. It's got some further tweaks, but that verbal definition is then given to another round of groups who then decide what you need in terms of services, equipment, and skills. And then another set of groups that check those, and then a final set of groups that kind of sign off on them. We also added to that specialist groups just with young people, supported by Nominet, so that we could sense check what parents were saying about young people's needs with young people, and so on. At the end of that, we've got the definition, which I'll show you in a moment. We then did a pilot survey with 207 households, asking every possible question under the sun in the survey to work out how to measure this. We used that to develop a measure to measure this, and did a national survey of 1,582 households for over 4,500 people and kids. Analysed that, looked at the drivers, took all of that results to work to stakeholders, people like yourselves, other people working in specific areas where households might have specific needs, say around disability, lack of English as a first language, living in rural areas, poverty, housing, and so on. And similarly, we did a kind of mini version of all of this in Wales to sense check it that it works for Wales, because the Welsh government is incorporating it into policy. So that's what we've done. So here's that first stage, that a minimum, this is the definition that all household types came up with. A minimum digital living standard includes having accessible internet, adequate equipment, and the skills and knowledge that people need. We did originally include a line that said, includes, but is more than. But actually, the but is more than is the next sentence, which I think is really important. It is about being able to communicate, connect, and engage with opportunities safely and with confidence. So it's not just the kit, it's not just the skills, it's the ability to use them safely and with confidence for things that you want to do. And the households came up with effectively 3 levels of stuff: the devices and the connectivity and services, the ability to functionally use those, to actually be able to use the devices, turn them on, manage them, etc. But also the critical skills to keep safe online, to interact appropriately with others, to know what to do and what is happening with your information online. So we need to point out, though, this is about what is enough. We could say, what good looks like, but this isn't what good looks like. This isn't my house, where I've got multiple kids who at university or in later stages of school. They've all got devices. I've got devices through work and home. We're all fairly digitally skilled, etc. It's not that household. That's not what we're saying is the minimum. What we're saying is the minimum is enough such that you're connected well enough that your kids can get access to education, enough you can engage with medical services, enough to keep yourself safe online. And the people defining this may not themselves have met that, but they were defining a need that they thought would had to be met to meet that definition. Yeah. And so we ended up with data essentially in the later groups to fill up those sections of the house. And here's the full list. I'm going to whiz through this in a second. You can find this all on the website, which I will pop in the chat. So equipment, functional skills, critical skills, and for skills, talking to parents and young people, the ages or the school stages at which people should pick up those skills such that what they're doing online is safe and okay. So on equipment, broadband is enough for all of the people in the household to use it at the same time. We haven't put a number on that because that's an ever-changing beast, but that's that. We have put, although the families put a number on data, but data with a mobile device is assumed to be in addition to broadband. So if all you've got is a mobile device with data, that doesn't meet the standard. There is a need for the actual home broadband. Large screen devices, enough to kind of share around parents and children so that everyone can do what they need to do. And by that, we mean a laptop or a tablet or a home PC that is good enough with a good enough screen size to do education and maybe work things and so on. Headphones were brought up as important, the ability to do things online privately. Many households don't have lots of space for people to be digital. They don't have their own little office like I've got here. Smart TVs, because that's access to digital content and cultural content. Again, the most basic smart TV with a basic subscription of some description. And gaming. This is one that sometimes people kick back on, but young people and adults were saying that gaming is really, really important for children's kind of cultural and personal engagement. And lots of people now game as part of their social lives, everything from little mobile app games to big, expensive, online games and so on. And we even have, from some of the qualitative interviews, as Loughborough would say, evidence that, for, say, people with kids with autism or people with kids with long-term ill health, etc., access to things like gaming and other content is a lifesaver for them, as it were, because it allows them to remain engaged. We've modeled that in our survey, and we find 81% of households are likely to fully meet this, right? We could model it very, very, very strictly, and we get a much lower number, but we do think that that's a reasonable estimate of where households are at. We have 15% of households who are falling down because they've got one or more of these bits missing. And we've got 4% of households who are essentially just got smart devices, and that's what they've got, and that's everything for them. The functional skills, this is the practical stuff. Can you turn on the device? Can you save a document? Can you go on a Zoom call? Have you got an email account, etc.? Can you book online things, and so on? Can you do the school connection as an adult and so on? Check what's happening with your school kids and so on. These are practical skills. They include skills that are not in the essential digital skills framework from government, because these are what households believe they need in things like monitoring and managing phone data use. That's not down as an essential life skill in the government's skills for work and home. But actually, if your mobile data tends to run out at the end of the month, it's something you have to teach your kids and yourselves to manage and so on. So there's an interesting mix of skills in there. We've still got 18% of households where parents or older children are not meeting these basic skills, and a lot of households where the primary school kids are not meeting some of these basic skills. And if you look, that's a very short list, which is essentially turning devices on and off and doing some basic tasks. The critical skills, are the ones where a lot of households fall down. These are the ones around knowing your digital footprint, knowing what to share online, how to identify risks, how to avoid scams, using secure passwords and so on. What we find is that around 30% of households, the parents and older children, are not confident in this full set of skills. And for the primary school list, which is very small, again, the parents don't think their children are as skilled in those or as confident in those as the standard would like. So then we put it all together, and what we find is that 45% of households with kids don't meet the standard. And quite a few people have gone, oh gosh, that's a big number, 45% of households with kids. But unfortunately, it's built on some existing worrying statistics, that 4 in 10 single parent households are in poverty. 20% of UK households with children are in poverty. 40% of households don't meet the minimum income standard, which means that they're probably operating on something like, the minimum income or the living wage or less as a household. So, and we also know that digital skills are not as big in the population as people would hope. So you put that together, and in some respects, it's not a surprising figure, but it is a worrying figure, because that's 3.7 million households. are falling down on one of those things, especially the critical skills and possibly the equipment and services. But what the households were clear about was the importance of digital family life. As I'll show you in a moment, most of the predictors are related to poverty, and that digital safety remains this big critical concern for households. If we look at the statistics, I don't think I've got all the fancy statistics on these slides, but if you want them, you can have them. But the key predictors are all related to poverty. If we look at socioeconomic grade, if you know that grading of A, B, C1, C2, D, E, where D, E are people who are either long-term unemployed or in poverty, etc. And A, B, that's me, university professor, whatever. It's just an almost straight line in terms of probability of meeting the standard drops and drops, from nearly 65% for people like my household to less than 40% or to around 40% for poorer income households. And the same if we look at deprivation in the area that they live in, indices of multiple deprivation. The more deprived, the much less likely are people to meet the standard. So again, being a single parent is a predictor. Having more than 2 children, so larger households, is a predictor. Where the parents are not identifying as white is a predictor. Households where respondents have got health issues, so the parents have got health issues, they're more, they're less likely to meet the standard. And households where there is at least one state benefit coming in are less likely to meet the standard. So it's kind of not rocket science, but what it does point out is that if you think about not meeting it means that you're falling down on probably on several of these things. And though it looks like a long list, when you read the individual items, these are not, complex digital skills or everybody in the house having a top-end iPhone or whatever. These are enough kit for people to get education, health, and so on access, enough skills to use those devices, and enough basic skills to stay safe online. So that's our research results. I now hand over to Emma to talk about what's next.
Yeah, thanks, Sim. So this provides, and I know many of you in the room have a real focus around children and young people and families. So this is a really, really great evidence base, as well as hopefully a helpful framework that really brings together the sense that what you need for digital inclusion needs to cover all of those different bases within a household. But the aim was always to think about how can we provide a benchmark, a national benchmark that is relevant to the population overall, whilst recognizing that actually every household is different. But the next stages are to then develop this out for different households. So that's working age households without children, single and couple households, and also pension or retirement age households, again, single and couple. And the reason that we've chosen those is that is then the core set of household types that's been used for the minimum income standard work by Loughborough University for well over a decade now. And I think that's really important because, of course, it does mean what we would like to do in due course is be able to get the funds together to repeat the survey research that Simeon was talking about. And so it could be that really strong relationship between poverty and being at or below the minimum digital living standard, that might look different, for example, for pension age adults, where there might be some different dynamics there. Poverty is likely to be a core indicator for all groups, but there could be some differences there as well. Next slide, please, Sim. So as Sim said, I've been involved in the start, but I work for Good Things Foundation, and hopefully some of you will be familiar with things like the National Digital Inclusion Network, National Data Bank, Learn My Way. Karen, thanks so much for sharing that link. But I mention that because our role really is about how can we use this evidence in order to then think about, well, what should strategies, what should action plans, what should provision around digital inclusion be? How can we support the use and engagement of this research in real life? And so when we've been thinking about this, there are lots of different ways in which we think the minimum digital living standard can be helpful in kind of real world application. And I'm just going to give a few examples of some of the engagement that we've already been having with the minimum digital living standard. So next slide, please, Sim. So as Sim said right at the start, the Welsh government and the Scottish, the Welsh government and the Scottish government have already picked up on the concept of a minimum digital living standard and commissioned some additional research to build that out. And in fact, a minimum digital living standard for Wales is already part of Welsh government policy around digital inclusion. We've also, over the last year, done a lot of place-based thematic engagement. So very similar to what we're doing here, where we're offering presentations to different networks. There are a few mentioned here, like the LGA's Digital Inclusion Network, Essex and Hert's Digital Innovation Zone, interesting ones like the UK Regulatory Network as well, who have an interest around vulnerable consumers and customers. So a real mix of different place-based networks or networks that have a particular thematic focus like anti-poverty. And we've also been invited to input and share about minimum digital living standard through a number of different kind of fora as well. And imminently, actually, an update will appear in the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Digital Inclusion's State of the Nation report. That comes out next week, and that includes a section on minimum digital living standard as well. It's been really interesting that government digital services and user research have been wanting to both find out about the findings, but also think about what this means for the design of services. And I think that's really important in terms of recognizing that a lot of interaction with services can be at a household level rather than individual level, and also recognizing the everything that you need in order to be able to really effectively engage with online services. So Department for Education user researchers are really interested in working with us to think, okay, well, what might be a good use case for minimum digital living standard in relation to some of the work that they're doing. And we've also developed a briefing because we're really conscious that this is important data and it sits alongside other key data on digital inclusion. So there's Ofcom data, there's data from Nominet's Digital Youth Index, there's the Lloyd's Consumer Digital Index, and we're also working more with the BBC as well, who are also really interested in understanding more about, the different populations and how they engage with digital. And finally, we have been kind of sharing this also with UK government policy teams as well as the user research teams. So that's just a bit of a sense of the range of stakeholder engagement we're having, and all of those different organisations and networks are finding different ways in which this might be helpful. So there's no one prescribed approach. Next slide, please, Sim. And so this is a quick example about how one local authority is using it. So London Borough of Camden has really picked this up, and they've been using it actually to start with their own workforce and thinking about the level of digital access and capability within their workforce and what their responsibility is as an employer to providing training, providing access to devices and skills. And so that's already shaped their training, learning and development offer. And they are now also starting to think about how they use this with other stakeholders in Camden about working out what is their responsibility and what isn't their responsibility to deliver. And I want to, I suppose, really underline this research, the framework, we are not advocating that it is up to government to make sure that every family achieves the minimum digital living standard. What we are doing is saying this is what members of the public say you need if you are, going to feel digitally included at a basic but decent level today. And so therefore, there are questions raised about, well, what is it that we do if families fall far below that? What is the responsibility of a local authority? Where does this fit within a plan for, you know, family health and well-being in a region, for example, or anti-poverty strategies? So those are the sorts of things that we're hopeful and already seeing this being picked up in that way. Next slide, please, Sim. So that's really why when it comes to kind of, we'll be really happy when we come to question time to answer any questions you've got, but just putting this in there now, we also really want to hear your ideas about what feels helpful, what's trickier, how you might use the evidence we've shared today, what it makes you think about your own roles and responsibilities, and whether something like the MDLS could be helpful to you in designing a collective or separate strategies and action plans, and things like, you know, how you might use social value. So hopefully food for thought. All these slides will be available, but I'm conscious that we're at the end of our time now. So thanks for listening.
So the Red Hen Project, this is our kind of mission. We support our community to raise healthy, happy and independent children. We work directly with families, and we are promoting positive, confident parenting and cooperative relationships between schools and families. So that's kind of our biggest sort of mission area. Statement. But this is kind of who we are. Oh, sorry, gone back. Oh, it's all going wrong, isn't it? Sorry, let me go back. Yeah. So basically, we just recognise that raising a family is really tough. And we work with families who have children aged 3 to 11, so usually linked to a primary school, or at the moment we also take referrals from housing providers, and also just more recently started taking some from social prescribers within GP surgeries. So we've been around for 25 years. We have a very positive local presence. Most families have heard of Red Hen who live in our area. And we support on a wide variety of different issues. So we do a lot of support one-to-one with families, and we unpack lots of issues around poverty, bereavement, housing issues, debt, domestic abuse, parenting issues, a lot around families with neurodivergent children and parents now. And we put in family workers into the home who support intensively one-to-one. These are some of the photos of our lovely team down below, just so that you've kind of got it's nice to sometimes see the human face of the work. Let me just move into the next one. And these are some of the things we do around our one-to-one support. So we run a variety of open access drop-ins. We have 3 of those that run a week. That's an opportunity for people to come together with their children or without their children, to hear from people coming in to talk about lots of different issues. Sometimes that's around digital inclusion issues. We've had people come in to help people get online to sort out water meters and all of that kind of thing. We also run family day trips and experiences during the holidays. We support with emergency care packs, so the kind of food and toiletries. We have a whole programme of school holiday activities, because we sort of recognise that's a really tricky time for a lot of families. And then we also run courses and workshops and different projects. So we do parenting courses annually, but we also do sort of cooking on a budget. We've recently done a mental health sewing project around mindful stitching. So we're kind of quite a varied in terms of what we deliver. At the heart of everything we do is that having that trusted adult, building relationships with families who don't easily trust services and want to be involved with things. So we've been looking sort of through, Emma, your research, which has been really interesting. And I think the 2 things that really struck out for me in the context of the work that we're doing is that digital exclusion makes it harder to get out of poverty. And that's something we see all the time. And then secondly, the thing I wanted, I don't know if Stacey's managed to get any sound.
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's back in the room. Amazing. I was starting to internally panic there, but I would have done it, Stacey. The second thing is the motivation, confidence, trust, and experiences shape people's online access. And that is such a massive thing for us that we see all the time. So, you know, Simeon talked about all of the digital kit that you can have. In lockdown, we managed to, we kind of morphed into a sort of ninja charity of getting out hundreds of laptops and things to help people get online. But actually their experiences and the trust and the confidence and their motivation were the issues. It didn't matter how many things they had at home. So I think what I wanted to do was really sort of introduce Stacey, and just to kind of say, Stacey, can you tell us a bit about some of the experiences that you have with the families that you work with? We've sort of chatted before this and pulled out a few really key things we want people to hear about, but Stacey, the kind of floor is yours.
Okay, no pressure. So I do a lot of one-to-one stuff with families. A couple of the things that come up an awful lot are they don't necessarily understand the wording of what they're trying to fill in or read or work. So I spend a lot of my time deciphering forms. I've had one family recently who her son's been offered a place at a special school for special needs, and he can't get there. So she was terrified about filling in the transport form because she didn't understand the wording. The form wasn't completely compatible on her mobile phone, and she was just really worried about getting it wrong and then him not being able to attend school. So it took 10 minutes. We sat down together and we got it done. But she trusted me enough to be able to come to me and say, I really need your help doing this. Another one is around the mental health side of it that comes up an awful lot. If they can't upload something online, it's the fear of having to then go in or pick up the phone to speak to somebody to do it. I had a lady last week burst into tears at our Thursday group because she needed to drop in a change of name form to the DVL to the job centre because she couldn't get it to upload online, and she had a panic attack and burst into tears. So it was fine. We did it together, sorted. If I needed to, I'd have gone to the job centre for her. But it's just terrifying for some people, and they don't understand how scary it is unless you're living it. Trying to think. Language barriers come up an awful lot, and not necessarily understanding the wording on the form. So having to have someone there to sit and decipher it. But that could just be down to literacy skills as well. We do a lot of funding forms, and words that don't come up every day, they didn't necessarily understand. Recently I was asked, what does incontinence mean? Because that was on the form, but they didn't understand what that was. So I was like, okay, we'll fill that one in together and work that out. A lot of worry about doing things wrong and then getting penalised because they've done something wrong. Yeah, I don't know if I've missed anything, Rachel.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, I think we were sort of saying, you know, the use of laptops is really important because Stacey's been finding that going to people's homes and they're wanting to do these forms, they're not compatible on a mobile. And again, the connectivity and having data and having to be on hold or to stay online for a long time, using up a lot of data, it's that whole issue around broadband. I think secondary school homework has become a really big thing. You know, secondary school homework is now all online, and there's a sense of sort of trust or lack of trust within having to ask the school. Sometimes families who are living in poverty and have a lot of challenges anyway don't want to be labelled again with something else to go and ask the school for. So we often pick up families around those kinds of issues and who will come to us and say, look, can you help me source a laptop? Because actually we need that for school. So it is something about trying to break down some of those barriers as well between institutions and services to sort of help people almost feel okay about asking for that. And I think this minimum digital inclusion thing is really helpful in that, because actually it's higher than I thought it would be. That makes sense. So it's almost like you'd almost anticipate a lot of these families being at a lower level. So I'm hoping the more people then are mobilized to ask for help, that the easier it will be for a lot of people. Like as Stacey said, the literacy levels. So I think there's a whole piece of work around upskilling people who are more prone to be in the minimum digital offer. That those kinds of families are also really struggling with basic skills. They may not have finished school themselves, and so therefore there's a whole other level of, it's not just about getting them online, it's about helping them with sort of literacy and numeracy skills. And I think the biggest one Stacey was saying is just this worry, if you do it wrong, it's going to impact your family in an even more negative way. So you may not get that EHCP done properly and in time for your child because you haven't done the form. So instead of seeking help, you bury your head in the sand and you don't do it, and therefore it gets worse. I think one of the things we wanted to sort of finish, because some of that's quite sort of feels quite like, oh gosh, there's a big hill to climb. I think the thing we wanted to finish with for Red Hen is that it's a really positive space that we're in to support people who are needing to engage more online and in a positive digital way. And I think the community groups that we have has shown a huge strength in helping each other. I think, Stacey, do you want to just share that example you said about the journals?
Oh yeah, we ran a park trip in the summer, and some of the families needed to update some bits on their universal credit journal, and they didn't know how to do it. And it ended up with, there was a lovely group of 4 mums all just standing around while the kids played, taking each other's phones, helping each other do it. And all of a sudden 4 people then had updated what they needed to update and weren't going to be penalised because they hadn't kept their file up to date. So it was really, really nice to see them working together as a team and making friends.
And I think Stacey's role is so important within our charity in terms of working alongside one-to-one, building their trust, helping them learn and motivate. And you've seen many times, haven't you, Stacey, that once you've shown people how to do it once or twice, they then build their confidence and do it again themselves. And but without that initial support, people are really, really struggling at levels where they shouldn't be. And I think that's what we would say, just that tech is moving really, really quickly, but the funding and the involvement of the community and voluntary sector and also sort of support work is not moving at the same speed because the funding isn't there, the support workers aren't there. So it's kind of like what we're trying to do is really try and help people keep up, but also really value the importance of the human connection with digital. A lot of the stuff now we're seeing for parents is come to this online webinar, here's some information here. We're not going to commission a service now that kind of meets you face to face. We're going to commission a service that means you can have loads of information, but you have to engage with it online. For so many of these families, it's just not working for them because they don't have that confidence. So I think it's about trying to move things face to face and on a digital platform at the same time if we can.